One of my patrons mentioned you, like as a
Hmm.
potential guest, and that's how we basically are now talking to each other. So,
Yeah, nice.
and I have some friends in Sweden, and I call it the fierce northern wastelands. And we were just talking about how in Sweden you have like big cities, but there's a lot of like I would call it no man's land, or like in the US they call it flyover country. Like there's beautiful nature, but
Hmm.
there's not a lot of people living there. But you live closer to the big cities.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you are we have to say a Viking, obviously, because everybody's watched the TV show Vikings nowadays. So anybody living in Scandinavia is a Viking.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
you
yeah.
have the beard going, Tommy. So, so
Yeah.
I don't
I had to fit the profile, right?
a little bit. um, just a little bit as an introduction for the people who don't know of you just yet. I mean,
Hmm.
martial arts, self-defense, physical training. You've got a
Yeah,
lot of different hats that you wear. How would
yeah.
you describe what you do?
So I would say that I teach basically two sides. The as you said, the Krav Maga self-defense part, and then also the physical training part. As in mainly in kettlebells for me, I work with an organization called Strong First. So that's both kettlebells, it's barbells and body weight training, but same principles basically going through all of it. So I would say two hats, like the fighting part, which is Krav Maga. I do BJJ. I've been doing MMA. I have three professional fights in MMA. So there's a mix of that, and obviously that leads into like it is realistic self defense or reality based self defense in that sense. So I would say that that's the two main hats that I work on. Yeah.
All right. No, when you say that I mean, I saw that your fights and poor
Yeah.
people that you kick in the head, and
Hmm. Yeah.
it's unfortunate for them, but good for you.
Yeah.
How did you end up doing MMA? I mean, because from the way I read it, I think if I get the timeline right, you were doing Krav first,
Mhm.
and then you added MMA to it, or what was that journey like?
So I started with Krav Maga in '94. I was 22 then, and after a while, we moved into and shared a gym with the guys who brought shoot fighting to Sweden. So
Nice.
I started doing some shoot fighting next to teaching Krav Maga. So we were teaching Krav Maga, and then the class after was the shoot fighting because we shared the mats. So I did that for a while. So, and this was basically in '98. I started doing shoot fighting and grappling and submission wrestling. Not like on a full scale all the time, but I added it to whatever I did. And how I got into my fights, I was coaching a few professional fighters at the place I was with physical training with kettlebells mainly. Alexander Gustafsson was one of them,
Nice.
and another guy called Bassam Youssef. He's the national coach for the MMA national team in Sweden right now. So those and a few other guys. I was coaching them for their upcoming fights. I think that was before Alex's first fight in the UFC around that time. And so every time we did warm up as like slow fighting and just playing around and nothing hard, and they started asking me, so when you're gonna do your first fight? And I was like, no. I was 37 at the time, so I was like, no, I'm not gonna do anything. And they kept nagging me, and I was like, all right, I'll sign up.
Okay.
So yeah, I signed up for a fight. It went well, and then I did two more fights after that. So that's how I got into doing the pro fights. The the main idea with the first one was I just wanted to try. I just wanted to because we don't have any competition in Krav Maga. So that meant you'd done a lot of sparring, you'd done a lot of fighting, but there was never any like real full contact in that sense. There is a difference when somebody actually tries to hit you in the head for real and sparring. You know, the split between sparring and fighting for real, it's significant difference, right? So I wanted to try it and felt it, and then I just did 2 more. So that's how I got into that.
That's a pretty interesting journey, because very often you see the opposite, that people come from MMA first or to some sort of competition combat sport first, and then get closer to the self-defense world, or people just stay in their worlds, like only self-defense or only combat sports. But it's less maybe it's more common nowadays. But like when I think we're of a similar age, so when we were young, that was not the case at all. Like self-defense was different also. It was much more martial arts oriented back then. How did you? I mean, you'd been training for a long time. By the time you say, "Okay, I'm going to try this MMA fight," how did you change your training specifically for that MMA fight? Because it's a very different context, and I'm assuming that the way you train beforehand would be different. Just the fact that you have several rounds, like what is it, 5-minute rounds maybe that you had to do, which is radically different from self-defense context, in which you hopefully have finished the situation in 5 seconds.
So I mean, for me, Krav Maga training, sparring it's never been like really short rounds. I mean, if you do like self-defense scenarios and all that stuff, you try to finish it fast and so on. But I mean, regular Krav Maga sparring I would say, is MMA, but you add groin kicks and all the ugly tricks to it, right? But again, if you want to do good sparring, you need to put protection on, right? So you have to have your shin guards, you have to have your boxing gloves or MMA gloves, and so on, and that takes away a lot of the techniques that people put in context with Krav Maga, like, and you can't really spar with hard kicks to the groin. So if you want to increase the intensity in your sparring, Krav Maga sparring looks like MMA, right? You have your stand-up fighting, you have your clinch, you have your like stand-up wrestling, takedowns, you have your groundwork, and so for me it was, and again, those rounds are never just really short, right? So but the change was obviously focusing more on technical details, as in cage work, how to use the cage for preventing takedowns or for doing takedowns, like tactics on how to move in the cage, get up around the cage, and then obviously just training the basics of MMA, right? Because my thinking was that I was never like the top grappler, but I had physical skills as like explosive and strength. So I was like, how can I use that to like make me as dangerous as possible in the cage? And so obviously I worked a lot on the grappling, on escapes, on foundations like positioning and getting into strikes and all that. And then so that was obviously also going more into sparring, like according to the rounds. The fights were three 5-minute rounds with 1 minute break. So you had to get your body used to that, you know, to that time frame of the type of recovery you get on that minute, which is basically not a lot at all. But yeah, so like going into that preparation for the mindset and so on.
Well, the thing you just mentioned was that, you know, there's a difference between sparring in Krav and in anything basically, and then actually competing. Like you said, even if you do hard sparring rounds, the coach is there. There's an environment in which people very often will they'll still hold back even if they're going hard. They don't take certain shots. Every now and then you encounter this guy who doesn't care and who's out to injure you in class, but typically that's not the case. And then, as you said, then you have somebody who actually wants to, at the very least, knock you out, maybe injure you or worse. Is that there's this difference between these two environments? How did you? What would be the lessons that you learned from those MMA fights in that aspect? Is there anything that sticks out?
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not, I talked to quite a few friends and people about this, but so even if it's not a self-defense scenario, if you take into the context that me for my fights, it was like a arena full of like 3,500 people. It was my home crowd in that sense. It's my home city. You're preparing for that special time. You do the weigh-ins, you do everything. So obviously your stress levels are pretty high when you go into the cage, right? Because you have the pressure of this person in front of you that wants to take your head off in a sportsman way, like way, but he still wants to knock you out. He wants you to be on the floor or tap you out, or he wants to win, and he's not holding back, right? Which is like in a real fight, and he's also trained on fighting, right? And if we talk self-defense scenarios, there might be people who's not trained in fighting, right? But this person is trained. You walk into the cage, it's your home crowd, you can't lose, right? That stress level is like, again, it's a sports setting, but I would say that it's as close to you as you can get to a real life scenario, fighting wise, in a sport setting.
Yeah.
I mean, stress levels, you walk in the cage, they close the door behind you and there's no way out. Now you have to fight, and this guy is trying to take you out, right? And on top of that, 3,500 people are watching you, and it's going to be recorded on TV, and there's going to be like reruns on it. And it's going to be forever on YouTube, right? So like things that plays in, and this increases to your stress levels, right? Because you don't want to lose. You don't want to mess up in front of all the people. So it's the physical person in front of you, but it's also all the other things, that the mind that plays out in your head, right? Preparing for the fight. And it's all set into one moment, right? They close the door behind you. You hear the sound of the closing door. The referee says fight. And it's you and the other guy, and nothing else exists, right? So yeah, I would say that again, going back to this, there's always a debate on sport versus realistic self-defense, right? Or reality-based self-defense. So stress levels are high in both contexts, I would say. If you get sucker punched in the street, probably there's not even a stress until it happens.
Yeah.
If there's a verbal escalation to a fight, obviously the stress levels are going to rise. But if it's something that's a surprise attack, there's no stress until it actually happens, right? In the sport fighting, again, all the things that I talked about is that you go into a scenario where you know that somebody's going to take your head off, or that's his goal, right?
Yeah.
So the buildup of stress is different, but it's still stress. Again, we know that the brain doesn't know a lot of difference if it's a sports setting or a realistic fight. If somebody tries to hit you in the head as hard as they can.
Yeah.
So that, and obviously also the feeling of being hit and like full speed, full power, is different, as we said, from sparring. What I learned in that, I would say that after the fight, going back to sparring, it felt like everything was in slow motion.
Mhm.
Because the brain was operating on the level of realistic speed, and you went down to sparring. And if it's, I mean, I can't say exactly what it is, but it feels like your brain has been amped up to be on real speed. but you go back to training speed, and that can also be like the brain is on realistic threat level, and then the threat level goes down, which means you're more confident in the sparring. So it makes that easier, and it makes it easier to read people's movement. It makes it easier to move, to get out of things, to block them, to understand how they're moving before they're moving,
Yeah.
because you're kind of operating on a higher speed.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. It's one of the things that I tell my MMA students. I don't teach people to compete anymore because I don't have the time for it anymore. So, but we do obviously talk about, like, you know what it's like in training. You see a beginner in an MMA class that they do things a certain way, and you want to say, like, look, don't drop your guard like this, don't do this, because you're very vulnerable. And once they get a little bit faster and they make the same mistake, it's more difficult to punish them for it, to show them, like, this is where you're vulnerable, without actually hurting them. Now we get closer and closer to an actual fight. And I tell them, like, look, guys, there's stuff you will only understand what I'm talking about once you compete. Once you have somebody in front of you, not sparring, just who is there to win and beat you up and knock you out and so on, and who doesn't care if you get injured. And there's a huge gap between these two. For training hardcore sparring and then actual competition, there's a bridge you need to make. And some of the stuff that I'm telling you will help you to make, once you're there, the first time, like, oh, this is what he meant. And this is one of the things that I explained to them, and is that most people, the stress they feel is like, what if he hits me, full power? What's going to happen then? Well, one of the things I say is that, look, getting punched in the face doesn't hurt. You get the flash in front of your eyes if you're still standing. If you're knocked out, something else. But that doesn't hurt. Afterwards, maybe you're going to have a splitting headache and lots of pain, and maybe you busted up your jaw. That's different. But the impact itself, it's not painful. Leg kicks are much more painful than getting punched in the face, because the pain lingers. And it's those kind of things that I try to give my students. It's like, look, you have to understand there's a huge gap between training and actual competition. But everything we do in training needs to be taking that reality of competition into account. It's not like, well, this only works in training, so we don't care if it doesn't work in the real thing. No, that's not something we do. And a part of that is putting them under stress to simulate what it is like to actually compete, and making them very tired and so on. So my question to you is that you see the similar things happening in self-defense, whether it's Krav or something else, where you have, like, these, like you said, these longer sessions in which people have to hit the shields. You've got a guy who's all geared up in protective gears fighting you, and you exhaust the student so that they're really tired and they have to keep on going. I'm assuming you did that kind of training as well before your MMA fights. Right? Did you find that helpful to switch to a full contact fight, and when it's actually, the guy trying to hurt you? Do you think that's something that could help people understand better what it's like for real?
The type of training to be really, really tired. Definitely on the context of being like, to keep fighting as you're tired, as you're physically exhausted. One thing that doesn't trigger is the, like, hormone induced stress. There's different on exercise induced stress and hormone induced stress in context of the self-defense and so on. So that type of training, yes, definitely, because it will teach people on how to keep fighting when even if they're tired. And it will help them to understand that physical attributes actually works. Actually, it's really really, really important in violent conflict. I mean, there's no way of hiding that it's easier for a 100-kilo man to hit a 70-kilo.
Yeah.
There's no way of hiding it. If it wasn't the idea or the reality, there would be no weight classes, right?
Yeah.
So making like to getting this realization and going in there and understanding that yes, I can learn how to defend myself with special techniques and solutions to problems and so on. That would be one thing, but the physical part, it's definitely one thing. I usually say that, I mean, if you get into a fight with a 80, 90-kilo hockey player who's really physically gifted as an athlete, it's going to be hard for anybody to, because they're used to getting hit, they're used to physical conflict, they're used to pain, they're really fast and explosive, and they have all these physical attributes, and they probably also have a really good fighting mindset, because otherwise they wouldn't be like in that type of sport. So yeah, it's physical attributes, learning that type of fighting, as you said, like really have to go all out and then continue. That would definitely help develop the skills and the understanding of getting into that. Yeah.
Something that I did, my son wanted to learn MMA and train and go as far as he could. And one of the things we did a while ago was that, look, we'd be sparring and do like 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds, whatever. And one time I said, look, I checked how he was feeling. He was feeling good that day, right? I said, look, last round, here's what you have to do. You never stop attacking me, no matter what happens, until the bell rings and we finish the round. I think we did 3 or 4 minute rounds, I don't remember, but it was the last one, so he's already pretty tired. That if you stop for 1 second attacking me, I will hit you hard. I will hit you hard, and I will not stop hitting you until you hit me back and start up again. So as you know, as everybody knows who's done this kind of stuff, is after 1 minute you're kind of wiped out. You're wasted. And he was slowing down, so I just hit him. Brother, I mean, I outweigh him. I'm much heavier than him, so not going full force, but for him pretty hard. And he snapped back and he started attacking again, and he kept going and going and going until it was at the end. He did really well. And then he was like completely exhausted. He says, I feel like I have to throw up. And I'm like, okay, sit down, start breathing, focus, and so on. I helped him through it. And a few minutes later, I said, how do you feel now? And he says, I feel okay. I'm tired, but I feel okay. I said, look, this is the lesson. The lesson is that you're in the middle of a fight. It's not going well. You will feel exhausted. Your body will tell you to give up. Your mind will tell you to give up and just take the beating and stop fighting because you're exhausted. You know that that's going to go away now because you've experienced it. You know that a few minutes later, you will be tired, but your heart rate will go down again. It'll be easier to focus again. That feeling of nausea, of wanting to vomit is going to go away. This is all just your body reacting to the extreme stress, the physical stress and mental stress a little bit that you experienced, but that's going to go away. So it's, for me, one of the things I often try to give is like experiences. Like, this is not like the real thing, but it's something like that. It's something similar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. But one thing that I do think that a lot of people in self-defense don't talk about very much is the physical reality of how our energy systems work. If you're doing a completely anaerobic event for 10 to 15 seconds or up to a minute, after that you're so full of lactate that you can't really do it anymore. So if you don't prepare your body physically for being able to handle lactate and recover while doing the fight, it doesn't matter what techniques you know, right? I remember I did a Instagram post a while back that, you have this saying of that the best self-defense is running. And I usually say, yeah, it is. assuming you can run faster and longer than the other person, right? If he's more physically capable than you, he'll run you down and then beat you up when you're tired. So if the body is not like up to the skills, it's not going to happen. And I remember like it was my second fight. At round 2, I got the guy against the cage on the ground. I pinned him against the cage, and I was like overhooking on one side, grabbing the arm and hitting with my left. And I think I hit him as hard as I could, like 37 times. So I think I counted it on the video, like at least above 30 times with the left. And you burn out.
Yeah.
In the end, people go like, punch harder. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
There's lactate, there's physical attributes that stops me from actually hitting as hard as I did in the beginning, right? Because the energy systems doesn't work like that. And I think that that's something that needs to be put into the self-defense training.
Yeah.
Dirty techniques, dirty tricks, that's all good. But if it isn't backed up by physical attributes, it's not a card house, because you might have the chance of actually winning in those 5 to 15 seconds or whatever people talking about. But there's a really, really high probability that it's going to be a longer fight. And if you're not physically capable, then the other person might win because you just don't have the wind to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And so that type of training, as you talked about, like having to continue is definitely a thing that makes you, mindset wise is one thing. Obviously you have to fight no matter how tired you get, so it's on the mindset, but it also shows you that we need to build the physical attributes so that they can back up the mindset.
Yeah.
So that there's that mix of it. Right?
I agree, and like you said, earlier, the stress you get from cardiovascular stressing somebody, as opposed to the hormonal stress of an adrenal dump in an actual situation, it's not the same thing, and it's hard to simulate that. However, the energy systems are the same. And could you talk a little bit more about the different anaerobic systems there are and the aerobic system for the audience that might not understand that? Because it is a reality. It's hard to explain. The best analogy that I think for people who are just into MMA can understand, or combat sports, is if you see a fighter, he's in a championship fight in the UFC, he has to do 5-minute rounds. And in the first 2 to 3 minutes, he gives everything he has. How well is he going to do for the rest of the fight? Not very well. This has to do with energy pathways, energy systems that we have. Could you explain those a little bit in short for people to understand?
Yeah, so there's basically 3 of them. And the very short version is that the first one, the completely anaerobic, which is creatine phosphate, is working for 10 to 15 seconds maximum. That's like your 100-meter sprints. And then you have the second anaerobic, which lasts up to which builds on a little bit more on lactate and so on. And that lasts up to a minute. And above that is or a minute and 30. And then up after that, you got your aerobic system, which recovers you. Or like, that's the jogging, right?
Yeah.
So like 100-meter sprint, 800-meter run, or a jog, right? Now, if you burn out completely and you try like those first 15 seconds and you try to continue, there's like nothing left. Right, the body cannot recover. It has to recover in some way, and that usually happens by your aerobic system recovering your body, right? And so if you fight somebody for 15 seconds and they can last you longer, you'll be start building lactate, and that's gonna take even longer to recover, right? So taking that into a context, just as you said, you see fighters, they go into the cage or the ring, they're really good shape. They're like physically prepared. They're good fighters and so on. Now, if they burn out in the beginning, it's going to take a long time for them to recover. And some of the taking into the consideration, if it's a fresh fighter who hasn't been doing a lot of full contact fight and it's like a new experience, the adrenaline dump and the hormone induced stress will add to that. So their heart rate will, I think that you can talk about 0.2 seconds from normal heart rate to 180, 200 beats per minute, which means that you go into a fight, you're ready, and then all of a sudden your heartbeat is 180 because of the stress. That means you will leave your normal rate, go into that higher rate, and that will mean that your anaerobic capacity will be lower because you're starting out at the heartbeat that's way above normal.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess that's why you see a lot of like fighters that goes into the ring for the first or second or third time, that they burn out early.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to that adrenaline dump, which means they burn out fast, and then it's really hard for them to get to fight with that.
And the result is that people forget that, I mean, what you just said, the way you explained the energy systems now is the anaerobic systems, they create waste products. It's like compared to a nuclear reactor, loads of energy, really fast, but there's radioactive waste afterwards. Same thing with the anaerobic system. It's going to give you waste products, and your body needs to get rid of those so you can be performant again. But that takes time. That takes the aerobic system and time. The one thing you don't have to waste in an actual fight, whether it's combat sports or in self-defense, is time. Time is the most precious commodity, and we typically measure it in fractions of seconds because things happen really fast. It might take you a long time to finish the fight if it's difficult. Like you said, you hit him 30 times and the guy is still not going down. Yeah, well, each single punch is as fast and hard as you can throw it. You don't do slow punches, but your muscles get burned out, and then you need time to recover. And that is in a combat sport context, that is something with your tactics and strategy that you try to manage, not burn out too quickly. But in a self-defense scenario, it's very different because the goals are different as well.
Sure.
And the context is different. There might be multiple people there. You might be, obviously, you're probably not warmed up. You're not ready. You might be sick that day. You might have a cold. Could be a lot of stuff going on. You might just come out of training and be very tired for like an hour and a half hardcore training. And then you go to your car and the guy jumps you. So all the bad stuff can happen that you're not really at your best. You still have to perform.
Sure.
And if you don't understand the energy systems that you just explained, it doesn't make sense. And I think this is what a lot of people in certain self-defense and martial arts circles fail to grasp. And as you explained so well, is that you have to experience this kind of stuff, understanding that it's not going to be the same thing as actually defending yourself, but you're getting used to like, okay, you're not going to get ideal circumstances. You learn a technique in class, you learn it slow, a clean attack comes at you, and then eventually when you master, you can do it well, it goes faster, and then eventually you do more of sparring or these very intense drills and so on. But it's still not the same thing as an actual fight. And you don't get to pick the conditions. You never get a choice. The attacker sets the scene. He is going to decide for you what's going to happen, and you have to adjust accordingly. And I think that's the biggest difference is that the energy pathways on top of that adrenal stress of like, this is for real. There's no preparation. Like you said, if there's some blah, 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 some verbal stuff going on beforehand, it's different. The stress levels start to rise. But if you get ambushed or it just goes off very quickly and you're not ready for it, I mean, heart rates can go well over 200 beats per minute. They can go really high. Like you said, half a second later, your heart rate spikes. And at that stage, and this is also something that is hard to understand unless you've experienced it, is that the heart valves don't open and close fully anymore. They don't have time. The heart goes so fast that actually the amount of blood pumped through the heart is going down because it's going so fast, because it can't function at full capacity anymore. Doesn't make any lick of sense when you're just training your perfect technique. But you have to be able to pull that technique off under those circumstances. And that is what I think it's a bad idea to go out and pick fights with people to experience that, even though I know people who've done that. I used to know a guy, he'd learn a technique and he'd just go out and pick fights with people and try them. He was a bit of an asshole. It ended one time when he, and this is a long time ago, that he wanted to do a crescent kick to kick a knife out of somebody's hand, and it worked. The knife was stuck in his foot, but he disarmed the guy with a crescent kick. I'm like, you learned an important lesson that day. So
definitely. But one thing that like on top of the energy systems, how they work, is that the more breathing you do through your mouth, the more oxygen you will have in your arterial blood. And that means that the affinity between hemoglobin and oxygen becomes harder. Which means that you are releasing less oxygen to the cells. And at the same time, you can't transport as much CO2 out of the muscles to recover, right? So the breathing becomes really important also. And going back to that physical attributes, when you go into combat sports and hard sparring and fighting, you learn how to recover during the fight. Yes, again, going back to self-defense context, people say that you want to have a short fight and so on, but we don't really choose that, right? If somebody's jumping me, I can hope for a fast finish, but I might miss him, and all of a sudden he grabs me, and he's on top of me, and he's bigger and stronger, and whatever, and all of a sudden I have to fight, right? So there's this distinction between like a self-defense scenario where you manage to like finish the fight fast and easy, and that develops into a fight, right? And if we get into that, we will have to be able to know how to recover during bad situations. In that sense, you know, it's enough that let's say that you go into a self-defense scenario, you miss your punch, you miss something, you trip a little bit, you're tired, maybe you ran a few steps, you try to get away from somebody, they attack you, they manage to get up to you, they attack you, you fall down, and now they're on top of you. So you have a oxygen depth because of the anaerobic exertion that you just did. You fall down, and there's a bigger and stronger person lying on top of you, which restricts your breathing, which means that you can't recover. Now, all of a sudden, you're in oxygen depth and you can't recover, and you have to fight at the same time, right? So learning how to withstand the pressure and let's call it the discomfort of somebody pushing you and pushing you down to the ground and restricting your breathing at the same time as you have to do, and how to move against that. That also becomes a really, really important part of the self-defense, right?
I agree, and it's like I said, back in the day before the UFC got started, you know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was not very well known in the West, and then people saw that and it didn't make much sense because everybody was like, okay, just punch a guy and knock him out. boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai was kind of like the overall way that people would view combat sports. And all of a sudden, you see this guy in a white gi just strangle people and put them in locks. And a lot of people got into training then, grappling a little bit more, and discovered that, oh wow, some guy lying on top of you, even if he doesn't do much, but he's just as heavy as you are, let alone heavier, it's exhausting. Yeah. Like you said, you can breathe. You have to learn to breathe differently, in breathing into the sides, into the back, and so on. Learn to adapt to the fact that you cannot expand your chest the way you normally do.
Yeah.
Not going to happen and it's going to change as you keep on fighting on the ground and so on. So that makes a huge difference. And I like what you said, oxygen debt is a concept that a lot of people don't know about, but you carry that debt with you until you pay it off. Yeah. Paying off that debt is probably not going to happen while you're still fighting. Like as you said, if you can't breathe, if you're giving it 100% as you carry that oxygen debt with you, I mean, your performance is going to deteriorate.
Yeah.
Continuously.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely, because as long as you're performing anaerobic activities, you're burning oxygen that you can't recover. Yeah. Right. So if you haven't recovered and you have to do another explosion to try to bridge somebody off or to punch them or, start to sprint again, you're already in depth, and then you use more of what you don't really have.
Yeah.
So you're going deeper and deeper into the water well, right? Yeah. And one of the things that, like, combat sports, sparring, and especially, like, obviously you can't train competition, right? You can't do that too much, but that teaches you how to recover during the fight.
Yeah.
Right. So I find that, like, sparring and really physical training teaches people how to recover during the fight, and that will help your self-defense, right? And if it's not there, it has to be there. To be realistic, people have to be pressure tested in self-defense, because again, techniques are nice, but if you don't know that feeling, if you don't get that feeling, and if you don't learn how to fight that feeling of, let's say, air hunger, I'm on the ground, I can't breathe, or somebody's choking you, you can't breathe, you get that panic. Somebody like a really strong bear hug or a body lock around the diaphragm that stops you from breathing. That's anything in that where you're being restricted in breathing, that'll bring you into that air hunger. And if you're already in that oxygen depth and you don't learn how to recover during that, it's going to be like a downward spiral of everything.
Yeah, and that is something I often see, that people who haven't done that kind of training, they underestimate how big the difference is. There's something I can make the claim, because I invented it, Randy's law, and that is that the differences are just as important as the similarities. And for instance, with my MMA students, I show them, like, okay, I'm in side control, I'll just be on top of you, and I want and I tell all the guys, okay, just watch. And the guy underneath me, I'm like, how do you feel? And he says, okay, I feel your weight. Okay, now I'm going to give you all my weight. And I put all my weight on. How do you feel? Oh, that's a lot more. Okay, how about this? And then I expand my chest into him so it crushes him. I'm like, feel the difference? He's like, oh my God, it's so much worse. Yeah. And then I asked the other guys, did you see a difference? They don't see it. It's the guy on the ground who actually feels the difference. Like, this is okay. This kind of sucks, and this is even a lot worse. But visually speaking, it looks the same. And I found this to be true with many techniques, is that you have to experience it. You have to feel it for it to make sense. Not necessarily just like for self-defense, but certain more traditional martial arts techniques are really good, and they look like crap from the outside. They look like this is nonsense. And then you're on the receiving end, and I'm like, okay, this actually works. But you have to be able to pull this off in the context that we just described, where you've got the adrenal dump is hitting you really hard, heart rate goes through the roof, and it doesn't work immediately, and 10-20 seconds later you're exhausted. I just saw this video of a police officer handling a break-in somewhere in the US, and he pulls his firearm out, and the suspect comes closer, and they end up fighting and struggling, and it takes, I think, about maybe a minute in total, and eventually he pistol whips the guy, and the guy goes down. His colleague comes in to handcuff him, and he's just leaning over the counter, trying to catch his breath, and he's completely out of it. It's like there's nothing. If that fight would have gone a little bit longer, I mean, I'm not sure if he would have made it, because he was completely exhausted, let alone be able to do a good technique or anything.
And I mean, that thing of like, if we talk about self-defense, like everyday carry, and you have like your I mean, not in Europe in that sense, but in the US, when you have the possibility of carry a gun or mace or whatever there is, the law says, I mean, to rely on that object as a safety is, I would say it's almost a false safety, right? Because again, if it becomes a fight, and in this case, a police officer, he chooses not to shoot somebody. He chooses, so either he chooses not to shoot somebody, or he doesn't have time, or he doesn't react. The other person does something that takes him out of charge, or like out of the control. To rely on that object and not have the physical skills of actually fighting for that, it's really dangerous, because it's almost like a false safety. Again, as you said, if that would have been a little bit longer and the other guy would have managed not to lose him, or not to get that gun it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't do anything unless you can actually work with it, right? So there's everyday carry thinking is, for self-defense in our society. I think it's, I don't know. Sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical to it.
Well, I agree, and I'm just writing it down, so I put the link up in the show notes. I wrote an article a while ago about training for edged weapons, and with knives and so on, and a lot of the mistakes that I see. And a critical one, in my opinion, and this is the one I learned from a friend of mine, Terry Trahan. He said you have to earn the draw. Drawing your weapon is not just going to magically be there. You have to earn it. You have to make sure you can actually draw the weapon, whether it's a knife or a firearm or mace, it doesn't matter. And that is not always going to be the case. Just like, okay, I will have the time to pull out that weapon. No. And even if you do have the time, if the guy is already close enough and he sees your hand go, he's gonna come at you, and you're never gonna. You might get it in your hand, but you won't be able to pull it out and actually deploy. Or it could be that you end up already being ambushed, or you get sucker punched, and it's while you're fighting that you have to get to your weapon, which is the example of that police officer. He holstered his weapon, and then was fighting with the guy, and eventually got to draw his firearm again. So you have, it's not just I have a weapon and I'm carrying it and I'm done and I'll just practice my techniques. No, the biggest thing you need to practice is drawing it, accessing that weapon, and knowing when and how in different circumstances, and also when you can't. It's like, he's too close. There's no way I can draw this before he can stop me. So I'll hit him first as I reach, and then draw, and so on. So it's the kind of training that I agree with you with. It's like a lot of people have this mindset of everyday carry, and like, okay, I've got this magical wand here. I'm Harry Potter. I can just wave the wand around and the problem goes away. No, like anything else, you need to train specifically for not just using that weapon, but deploying it, knowing when not, knowing how to stop. Because yes, you just defended yourself with your knife, but you're also going away to jail for many years, because the video camera sees you stabbing the guy 50 times in his neck. It's no longer self-defense. So that brings me to my question in a roundabout way. How do you incorporate the legal aspects of self-defense now? You teach in Sweden mostly. So do you focus specifically on Swedish law, or is it more general, or how do you go about that?
No, so yeah, I mean, I teach like internationally, really,
Yeah.
globally, a little bit in Sweden, but also in different countries traveling the world. So obviously the self-defense laws and whatever's covered in that specific area has to be taught by the instructor at that area.
Yeah.
Like it has to be there, and it has to be taken into context. I mean, again, if we go back to that everyday carry of people who has a knife, right? And they learn how to block a punch and then stab somebody in the face with a knife. I mean, that's not really self-defense, right? Not a lot of places would in not a lot of places the court would say that that's self-defense, right? To pull a knife when somebody's punching you, right? So all the techniques has to be in context with the law. And you know, this saying of rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 and all that stuff. I mean, obviously there's some type of truth to that thinking. Rather be alive than dead, of course.
Yeah.
But if depending on what you do in your self-defense, you might have to fight for the rest of your life in jail, you know. And so as an instructor, I have to take that into consideration. I have to teach like what's applicable to the law in the area. And obviously I can't know the laws in every country, so it has to be like, this is the basics, this is the foundation, this happens, you solve it like this, you react to somebody attacking you, you solve it like this. Sorry. And then you use as much force as you need, right? And as long as the person is fighting you, it's an ongoing struggle. But if the person leaves you, or you push them away and you jump them again, as if they're not attacking you back, then it's obviously you're the aggressor now, right? Yeah. Then different countries will have different say on that with lawyers and judges and so on. But it has to be applicable to the area that you're in. What I found out when traveling and talking to people is that like the immediate or the emergency self-defense laws is pretty much the same, more or less, all over the place. Yeah. You can defend, you can use force to defend yourself, you can use preemptive strikes if the threat levels are going so high so that you're in fear of your life, and it's easier for a woman to defend against a man, or you use more force. So there's some type of like aligning self-defense laws, and then everything goes around it. But yeah, it has to be in there for self-defense. You know, you have to know it. You have to understand a little bit, if you're teaching it in your area, what's the local laws, what does it say, and you know, I know we had police officers now. When I had a school, we had police officers talking about the self-defense law to help out with what's allowed to do and what's not allowed to do. We had all the students. We had the self-defense law posted on the website. Yeah. So they can look on it and study it and so on, and understand it a little bit. So yeah, it has to be there.
Oh, that's great. That's a good idea, putting it just on the website for students. Like, okay, you want to know what the law says? Here it is. Just read it. That's a really great idea. I hope more people would do that, because a lot of people have ideas about what the law says, but then the law says something very different. Yeah. And then there's a difference between, you may understand what the law says, but then there's a reality of how a judge will see it and a jury will see it. It's not the same thing. No, I really like, the way that you explain is that overall most laws are similar in different countries. The principle is the same. It's like, if you have a right to self-defense, you have a right to use force. Then we get to complex local issues maybe that will change depending on each country. but overall it's going to be the same. So you can apply your techniques and then try to figure out how to adapt to the local circumstances. One of the things that I do, and I've seen a lot of Krav people do as well, is when you disengage, you step back, do a 360 scan, and then look at the guy again. I found that this is a critical skill to learn as well when it comes to self-defense. If, like you said, rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Yes, how about it's not either or. It's not the only way to defend yourself is to kill the guy. No. You can defend yourself and not go to jail if you try.
Sure.
I would think that is a good goal to have in your life, staying out of jail.
Definitely.
And yes, there are circumstances in which you might have to do something that in the eyes of the law is going too far and you get punished for it. I see that, but that is by far not the standard. No. Many self-defense situations you can handle by walking away or using minimal force. And it's having this incremental level. Now, if somebody chooses to start all the way on the other end with extreme violence, of course, you have to react immediately to that level. But that's not always going to be the case. And who knows, you might be successful. You might knock the guy out with one punch, one technique, and he's down. And if then everybody whips out his cell phone and starts filming you and they see how you are soccer kicking his head on the floor, that's we're no longer talking self-defense. So how do you teach your students to disengage from the situation? Like we do the techniques, we do the drills, we do sparring. Let's say that you have a student. One of the things I teach is that if the guy goes to the ground, that is very often a good time for you to get out of there. The goal is self-defense. Your goal is not to fight the guy. Your goal is to get to safety, get away from this danger, which in many countries, that's what the law says, is if you're no longer in immediate danger, you have to stop. It gets tricky because what is immediate danger? Is he knocked out or not? Can he get up? What if he makes a move to get up, but he's not up yet? What do you do? But in many cases, once he goes down, even if you're not able to sprint fast, you have a head start. And he may be still, seeing all the little birds and bells around his head after being knocked down. But the mental aspect, the psychology of using violence, sometimes extreme violence, and then immediately the next second pull back away from it. How do you teach something like that? What would be a good way for people listening to practice that?
So, as you just said, you do the technique. If we take it into let's call it a technical solution first. I like to talk about understand, practice, apply. Right. So you learn something first, and you have to understand it, and then you start practicing it. But it's still on practice level. It's just practice, and then the last stage is application. So that if you in like the first stage of the understand, or like the why of what I'm doing and everything around it, it's just a motorical skill, right? It's just like I'm just learning how to do the move. So when this happens, I react like this, right? At that stage, I don't really put a lot of effort into the scanning and like the post-fight actions. But the closer you get to after a while in the practice stage, you get in there, you finish with moving out, scanning. We usually talk about, disengaging the person. We talk about changing the angle so that you can search and assess the area with at least your peripheral vision, so you see that there's nobody running into you coming. And by changing the angle, you see parts of the room that you didn't see before. That would be, let's say 45 degrees. We're in front of each other. There's an altercation. I move out, but I don't move out straight backwards because I don't know what's behind me. And I move out a little bit, let's say 45 degrees. That means I can scan a bigger part of the room. And it also makes it harder for you to come back to me. I try to teach that as you finish the altercation, instead of me backing away from you, I push you away from me. So that if you want to engage me again, you have to stop the backwards action if I push you. And then you have to take a decision to come back. Right? So you have to kind of let's say I push you away while I disengage. That means I stand my ground, push you backwards, so you go backwards. And then you have to restart from there. You have to stop that backward motion. You have to kind of restart and make a decision to come back after me. That gives me time, right? If at the same time as that happens, I change the angle, that means you have to, between like 45 to 90 degrees, that means you have to choose to stop, then you have to choose to come back at me, and then you have to change your angle of attack, because I'm not where I was when it happened before. So there's more decisions for you to make, and that gives me time to back out. At the same time as I can scan more of the room and see that there's not any more attackers, or I can also look for exits. I can see that, let's say I'm in the street, I don't step into traffic, and so on and so on. Other things that's not like you as an immediate threat, but like the secondary threats around, like stepping into traffic, or stumbling over something that would put me in a situation where you can actually attack me again, because I fall down. And all these contexts, we try to make sure that people start thinking about it as soon as possible, and especially during the application stage, where you go into like more pressure testing, higher speed, more stress. That's where you want it to happen all at the same time.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And yeah. I think that your approach, what it also, I think, is going to help with is breaking the tunnel vision. Mm-hmm. Because that is, yep. Especially for people who don't have a lot of experience, the first time often it just narrows down to like this really small part of your vision, and you're overly focused on the guy. And this is then what we often see, then people they are too focused on that. Yep. They don't see his body coming up from the side trying to attack you, or they can't stop punching. They just keep going. They're stuck in that mental loop because of adrenaline, because of their, a part of their brain is screaming like, this is working, keep doing the same thing over and over, which is problematic in and of itself. But just like you said, stepping back, but changing the angle and so on, actively pushing him away, opening up your field of vision again, can break that tunnel vision a little bit, and then hopefully you get this moment, like you said, to reassess, like, is he coming after me? And it's a good point I think you also made, is that for that guy, I mean, imagine that he is trying to attack you. You just, I don't know, you hit him once or twice, and then you push him back. He just got punched in the face, or elbowed in the face, or headbutt, or whatever. And he's still recovering from that, as he has to physically recover his balance. And then his brain is maybe screaming at him like, maybe you don't want to mess with this guy. And then you give him the exit. He can go yapping and yelling at you as long as he keeps going away. That's good. But you create this option basically for him to stay away. Hopefully you create the options to escape, or if he does come at you, like you said, you have time to line up your next shot and time it better, so that if he comes even close, you nail him before he gets there. So to me, what you just said makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And again, going into what's self-defense or not self-defense, I mean, if you choose to stay in front of somebody who's trying to hurt you, or who's building up, is it actually self-defense if it breaks into a fight? If I choose not to leave? So that's another part of it, right? I mean, knowing how to defend against the punch doesn't mean I have to stay and defend the punch. If I can say, hey man, listen, I don't want any part of this, I'm leaving now. And I start walking away. That's more self-defense than staying. I mean, if we just nitpick the words, really, right?
No, I agree. And Again, I tell students and people who listen to the podcasts, read my blogs and my books. It's like, look, it's 2023, and this was true years ago. Imagine that every single time you use physical techniques to defend yourself, somebody's going to be recording it. There's going to be cell phones. There's going to be a security camera. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Pretend, because in many cases that is true. If it's not the case, you're lucky. There are so many cameras nowadays, especially in urban society, is that there's a high likelihood of your actions being on video. And then the police will see that. They will decide with the prosecutor if they put you on trial or not. But imagine that this comes in front of a judge and a jury. And what they see is going to determine that your claim of self-defense is actually valid. And one of the things a lawyer will ask you is, well, sir, you pushed him back. If you clearly see my client stumble back after you punched him viciously in the face 5 times, why didn't you go away then? If you were clearly winning because he couldn't get to punch you back, you hit him 5 times. You push him back and you just stay there, sir. Why did you do that? Aren't you just an evil person who wants to hurt my client? And actually, we saw that you trained self-defense for 20 years. So you're actually a bully and so on. That is what lawyers do. They will defend their client. So one of the things, I think it was Peyton Quinn in one of his book about, he had an older book with Paladin Press, Adrenal Stress Fighting, in which he talks about his method of teaching that. And he said that your actions have to be congruent. Everything you do has to make sense on a physical, technical, tactical level, but also on a legal level. So that when afterwards, when the people who have time to study every fraction of a second of what they see on the video, that they will critique you, is that you have the best defense possible. It's like, look, I did this for this reason and so on. Or I was hurt, I couldn't think straight, he sucker punched me, I just instinctively worked, whatever. But it has to make sense. Yeah. It has to make sense afterwards. And this is, again, for the people in the audience who are screaming right now that we both are wrong, and actually it is better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. For those people, I will say, vaya con Dios, good luck. I wish you all the best. Yeah. Let me, you can send us a postcard from prison. Yeah. And again, it's a cliche, and like you said, there is some truth to that. Obviously, you'd rather not be dead. But why do you see it black and white? Why do you only see these 2 options when there are many, many more? Yeah. And there's so many options in between. We usually say it all depends, right? It depends on how ready I am, how early it built up, and how it started happening. As you said, there's a video camera in every altercation now, right? Or at least one, right? And it depends on the. Can we edit out a little bit? I just need to. Yep. I'm just going to make a note. Yep. All right. Sorry about that. The boy's still alive? I had just like 2 meters there's a door, and he's like, I know you're ready. I didn't hear it. No, but it's kind of like in my ear. It's really, really annoying. That's okay. That's fine. Yeah. So what was the question just before I started? Oh, it wasn't really a question anymore. It was more, we were talking about just, the legal aspects. Everything has to make sense when when you do self-defense. So I can just pick up on that. I mean, regarding that everything has to make sense when it comes to self-defense. There's going to be a camera everywhere, at least one camera everywhere, right? And if you look at a recording from 2 angles, you'll see one thing from behind me and you'll see one thing from in front of me, right? So depending on where that camera angle or that evidence came into court, you might be judged or not be judged. Because
you see it from behind me, you just see me swinging at somebody and somebody goes down, right? If you see it filmed from the other person's view, from behind him, you might see that he's holding a knife behind his back or by the side, but that's blocked by the vision of the camera from my body, right? So it all depends on what angle it's seen from, and what happened before. If the person is really aggressive towards me, that might not even be seen if it's filmed from behind me. If I'm slightly bigger and taller than the other person, they're going to be blocked out if it's filmed from behind, right? If you see it from behind him, you might see him going like this and picking the fight. You might see the blade, you might not see the blade, right? So of course, if there's a knife, in the situation, you shouldn't stand around there. You should either get out of there or have some like preemptive action, because bringing the knife out is enough threat to defend, of course. But when it comes to cameras and cell phones around there, it all depends on the angle.
Yeah, I've been doing violence analysis videos for the past 5 years on Patreon, in which I take some footage of an actual incident.
Yeah,
and this is something I constantly tell people. I've actually already written articles about that on my blog, explaining that. I mean, I make instructional videos for a living. I've been doing that for almost 20 years now. I started with Paladin Press back in the day, and then keep on doing it myself. If you don't understand how camera angles work and depth of field, then you don't know what you're looking at.
no.
And I tell people always when I do my violence analysis videos that, look, I can't really see what's going on here, or I think this is a camera angle thing. So they're used to it. But the best illustration, I think, there's an old FBI training video. And it's been a while since I saw it, so I might be off on the details, but it looks like this one officer is pulling a weapon and pointing it at somebody. And it looks like the guy is putting up his hands. And then all of a sudden, the other officer in the back shoots him, and it shoots him in the back. And that's this camera angle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you turn it around, the other camera angle is you see the guy, putting up his hand, stops his fighting, and then he's reaching for a firearm in his back. Yeah. And he's about to shoot that first officer. Yeah. And that's when the second one shoots him in the back, which is something that we're not supposed to do. No. And whenever there is another outrage on TV or in the media about something that happened relating to violence, whether it's with law enforcement or not, I always say the same thing, like, wait until all the evidence is in. There are times when I look at it that I'm like, okay, this looks really bad. But I've been wrong before when a new camera angle shows up or something else happens and this and that. So that it's sometimes very, very hard to make a definitive statement on anything unless you have a lot of information. And video lies, pictures lie, and videos lie. This is, with all the video available, YouTube, social media, and so on, you would think that people would have understood that by now, but they haven't. And making it a little bit less serious, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars.
Yeah,
I checked. There were, I think, 30 or 40 cameras there in that theater filming everything. We only get to see one camera angle. One.
Yeah.
Don't tell me there weren't other ones filming it from the side and from behind. That never came out. So I'm like, but people ask, what do you think? Is that real or not? I said, I don't know. There's reasons that it looks real. There's reasons that why it might look fake. But until we get a second camera angle, nobody will know. What I can tell you is that I am 99.99% certain that there are videos of different camera angles of that incident, and they're not releasing them. So, and that's fine. I don't have to know. The point is that it matters. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to if we talk about the self-defense scenario, right? If it's up there and if it's shown from the wrong angle, it might not it might be really hard to say otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many things to take into consideration when it comes to self-defense, and there's so many things that might happen depending on angles of cameras or what. It doesn't even have to be a camera. It depends on what the witness saw.
Yeah.
At what point of time did they look at the altercation? You know?
Yeah, because typically people watch after the first punch.
Yeah. Did they see the first punch happen? Did they see the build up to the fight? Did they see you actually saying, "Hey, I don't want to fight you, I'm backing out," and starting moving back, and then the fight happened? Or they just saw you hitting somebody and they fall down? When at what point of time in the altercation did the witness see it, right?
Yeah.
They might be 2 meters away, but they didn't turn around until they heard something, and that's not until it's too late.
Yeah.
Right. Or too early, you know, but so it's knowing when to back out and actually taking it into a situation where you can claim self-defense.
Yeah.
It's, again, did you try to back out? Because self-defense, backing out, that would be the best option. We always, right?
Yeah.
And if I stay into this, as Rory Miller calls it, monkey dance, when you kind of chest up, and that's not really self-defense. That's building up to fight.
Yeah, and it's understandable. It's human nature.
Yeah,
and I mean, I think that's something that hopefully, you know, more and more people will understand as self-defense has evolved over the many decades that has been taught in the Western world, and there's more. Like Rory's work is really great with that, and Demeere McCracken with 500 Rising doing excellent work as well when it comes to giving a full picture of violence, not just the physical aspect, not just the psychological or the legal, but like everything.
Yeah.
And violence dynamics, the way violence works is something I feel like still too many people think it's a John Wick movie. It is not. It's not how it works. And it's very difficult to give a full picture and have people understand, like, look, this is the way violence works. It could be nothing. It could be the end of your life. And there's a lot of space between these two, so many variables that they're impossible to control. So you can only do your best and train and try to, you know, be smart about the way you do things, but there's no guarantees. If you, like Mark says, you know, if you want a guarantee, buy a microwave oven. But in violence, there's no guarantees.
No, it does. And again, of course, preparing and training and making sure that you're physically capable and that you have the skills to deal with certain situations and so on, and the mental capacity for it. That of course that increases it, and that puts you in a way better situation than somebody who doesn't train at all.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantees, you know.
Yeah.
You can't defend the hammer to the back of the head if you don't see it, right? So it's a big world. It's a big context, right?
Yeah.
So many things that plays into it that makes it really, really hard to control. And I think that would be one of the biggest differences from fight sports or combat sports to self-defense. That difference of variables, because on all the types of situation where it can arise. I mean, anywhere, anytime, right? And the verbal escalations and you know, situational awareness, trying to stay out of things. It's two different worlds. But with that said, combat sports will always help because you're more used to violence, you're more used to getting hit, you're more physically capable of receiving violence and delivering, like the physical part of the violence, right? So, yeah.
I agree with that. The only caveat I would say is that as long as you understand the differences between the combat sports arena and self-defense context, like you said, there's many different variables.
Yeah.
What I've seen, and there are some really interesting examples of that, is that people who are really good at combat sports, and then they assume that, well, it's going to be the same thing. I'll know how to handle self-defense without actually training specifically for that environment.
Sure.
The best example is Guy Metzger, who was really high-level UFC fighter, and he ends up in this confrontation in the street. There's a guy who slaps his wife, and Guy, apparently he intervened, and he hits or punches the guy. I don't remember. The guy comes back and swings at him, and he blocks it, and I think he hits him again. The guy had a knife, and Guy's thumb was almost separated. It's very hard to find the article. But it's still out there because I wrote a blog post about it, and he later said I was very lucky. Yeah, because if he wouldn't have blocked it, it would have cut him in the neck. It would have been over. Yeah. So it's understanding that, you know, that it's a reality when you talk about self-defense. Yeah, it is safer to assume that a weapon will be deployed, that multiple people will be involved, than to assume it's not going to happen. No. Whereas in combat sports, you can safely assume that no weapons, no multiple opponents, and if it gets too bad, the referee will step in. Yeah. All that is by default not going to be present in self-defense, and that's what I see is the people from the combat sports world who assume, well, I train hard, so it's going to be fine. And then people from the martial arts, more traditional world, who assume, well, I train hard and I've got great technique, so it's going to be fine. I don't think that's how it works. Reality is what it is. It doesn't care about what we think. And we have to try to be realistic as much as possible. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely makes sense because, again, the combat sport prepares you for your sport, right? If you do BJJ, it's that. If it's MMA, it's that. If it's kickboxing or Thai boxing, it's that. The benefits of all those obviously is that you're used to violence, right? As in the physical part of it, under that context, and that makes you a more efficient fighter because your body can do things, and you're used to getting hit, and you're used to pressure and that type of stress. But to get caught in that as self-defense, that's not a realistic view. Again, you have to take all those other things into consideration that we just talked about, like scenarios, multiple opponents, risk of weapons, lighting, stress. When did it happen? How does it happen? How ready am I? Am I tired? Am I, everything else that plays into it? Will I be stressed for being in traffic for half an hour and you're already annoyed? There's so many things that plays into like the self-defense world and your mental state on how you react to something. And again, it depends on a split of a second if I block something or don't block it. Yeah. If I just look slightly to one side and it happens just out of my eyesight, even if the person is just in front of me, because I get distracted by his friend on that side, then I'm not going to block it because I don't see it, right? Yeah. So it's that thing. And going into like self-defense versus combat sports, some of the techniques are good in combat sports for blocking and so on. Some of them are less efficient against the knife. So there's so many more. The involvement of weapons like knives, clubs, pistols, threats that can, like, the more people every day carry, the bigger the risk is that. I'm not saying that everyday carry people are attacking people. I'm just saying the more people are carrying weapons, knives, sticks, or like in the criminal side, the risk of a weapon emerging during a conflict increases.
Yeah, of course.
And that changes the world between combat sports and fight self-defense hugely.
Yeah.
Two different worlds, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think this is a good spot to end the first part, because I know your boys are waiting for you, so we still have to do the bonus part for my patrons. So
Cool.
everyone listening, we are going to switch to Patreon, where I have a bunch of fun questions for my patrons for Tommy. Before we go, Tommy, where can people reach you? I'll put the links in the show notes, website, social media, anything specific you want to send people to.
Easiest one is tenacity.se.
Okay.
That's the website, or Tommy Blom at Instagram.
Okay, I'll write that down.
In just one word. That's probably the easiest ways to find me.
All right, folks. So I will put that in the show notes. That's going to be on my blog, and where I'll put all the links so you can reach Tommy right away. Tommy, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. We're going to say goodbye to the audience here, but we will continue right away on Patreon. Okay, folks. Cool. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.